The blue light of my phone illuminated the dark kitchen countertops, displaying a text message that finally severed the last thread of my patience. The house was dead silent save for the hum of the refrigerator. I am Patricia, a 68-year-old widow who spent the last 4 decades building a peaceful life only to have it disrupted by the very people I tried to help. My son David and his wife Sarah had moved into my 4-bedroom suburban home 8 months ago under the guise of saving for their own place. However, the message glaring at me from the screen proved their intentions were entirely different. David's text read, "Mom, don't come out of your room this Christmas Eve. Better yet, maybe go stay at a hotel. My wife will lose it if she sees you at her party." I didn't burst into tears. I didn't throw my phone against the wall, nor did I draft a long, emotional paragraph about how much I had sacrificed for him. Instead, I simply locked my screen, placed the phone down, and took a slow sip of my peppermint tea. The audacity of being uninvited from the living room of the house I owned outright was staggering, but it wasn't entirely surprising. For months, Sarah had been slowly pushing me into the margins of my own home, treating me less like a mother and more like an unwanted tenant who was overstaying her welcome. Rather than sitting in the dark feeling sorry for myself, I stood up and walked down the hallway to my bedroom. I pulled a sturdy leather duffel bag from the top shelf of my closet and unzipped it. If they wanted me out of the way for their lavish holiday party, I would gladly oblige. But I wasn't going to hide in a hotel, and I certainly wasn't going to leave them with the comfortable, all-expenses-paid lifestyle they had grown so accustomed to. As I folded my sweaters, a quiet, resolute plan began to form in my mind. The days of my blind generosity were officially over. To understand how we reached this boiling point, you have to look back at the day they moved in. David had always been a passive boy, easily swayed by whoever spoke the loudest. Sarah, on the other hand, never lacked volume or demands. When they arrived with their boxes, I gave them the master suite, thinking it would give the young couple the privacy they needed. I moved into the smaller guest room at the end of the hall, happy to downsize my footprint. Within 2 weeks, the subtle takeover began. I came home from grocery shopping one afternoon to find my favorite vintage floral armchair sitting on the curb. Sarah had replaced it with a stiff, modern gray sofa that looked like it belonged in a dentist's waiting room. When I calmly asked about my chair, Sarah didn't even look up from her phone. She just waved her hand dismissively, stating that my furniture didn't fit her aesthetic. David stood nearby, staring at his shoes, muttering that they just wanted the place to feel a bit more updated. I didn't scream or demand they fetch the chair back. Instead, I observed. I watched as Sarah began dominating the kitchen, leaving piles of dirty designer dishes in the sink, while she recorded cooking videos for her social media. I watched as my grocery bills tripled to accommodate her demand for imported cheeses and organic matcha powder. The final straw of that month was discovering a joint emergency savings account I shared with David. Meant for medical emergencies had been drained to purchase Sarah a luxury handbag. Again, I chose action over argument. The very next morning, I drove to the local bank branch. I quietly removed my name from our shared accounts, transferred my retirement funds to a completely separate institution, and locked my new debit cards safely in my purse. I didn't announce it. I just waited for reality to catch up with them. The fallout from my silent financial maneuver happened on a busy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting on the back patio, enjoying the crisp autumn air, and reading a mystery novel when Sarah's car screeched into the driveway. She slammed the car door, stomped up the wooden steps, and threw her expensive purse onto the patio table, nearly knocking over my coffee cup. Her face was flushed with anger. "Your card declined at the grocery store?" she snapped, towering over me. "I had an entire cart of food for my dinner party tonight, and the cashier looked at me like I was some kind of beggar. Fix it." I carefully marked my page with a bookmark, closed the novel, and looked up at her. "It didn't decline, Sarah. The account is closed. I moved my money to a private account." David walked out the back door just in time to hear my response. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking panicked. "Mom, what are you talking about? How are we supposed to pay for the groceries? You know Sarah's business hasn't taken off yet. And my paycheck goes to my car loan. You will have to budget," I replied, smoothly picking up my coffee. "I am no longer funding your lifestyle. The free ride on my groceries, your luxury bags, and your dinner parties is over. I provide the roof over your heads. The rest is your responsibility." Sarah scoffed, crossing her arms. "This is completely unfair. We are family. You're just trying to control us because you have nothing better to do." I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain the missing savings account or the stolen armchair. I simply smiled, picked up my book, and walked back inside, locking my bedroom door behind me. From that day on, Sarah began treating me like a ghost, deliberately turning up the television when I entered the room and leaving her shoes scattered directly in my walking path. Sarah's retaliation was petty, but persistent. She started inviting her friends over every evening, blasting loud music and completely taking over the living room and kitchen. If I walked out to get a glass of water, she would roll her eyes and loudly complain to her friends about having no privacy in her own home. She was trying to make me so uncomfortable that I would confine myself entirely to my small bedroom. I decided it was time to adjust the infrastructure of the house. I sat at my small writing desk, opened my laptop, and logged into the various utility portals. For years, I had effortlessly paid the electricity, water, gas, and internet bills. Since they were treating the house as their exclusive domain, it only made sense they took on the responsibilities of ownership. With a few clicks, I scheduled a transfer of service. I transferred the electricity, water, and trash collection into David's name, effective at the end of the week. Then I turned my attention to the internet. Sarah relied heavily on the high-speed fiber optic connection for her social media posts and endless streaming. I didn't transfer that bill. I simply canceled it. I bought a small, discreet mobile hotspot for my own bedroom, ensuring I had all the connectivity I needed for my emails and shows. I then walked into the living room, unplugged the main router I had been paying for, and placed it in the donation box by the front door. I didn't say a word. I just went back to my room and enjoyed a peaceful afternoon, knowing that the foundation of their comfortable little kingdom was about to shake. The internet shut off right in the middle of Sarah's live makeup tutorial. I heard a loud groan from the living room, followed by frantic footsteps pacing down the hallway. David knocked tentatively on my door a few minutes later. "Mom, the Wi-Fi is down. Did you forget to pay the bill?" he asked, his voice laced with annoyance. I opened the door slightly, maintaining a calm expression. "I didn't forget David. I canceled it. I also transferred the electricity and water into your name. You should receive the first bills in about 3 weeks. Since you two utilize the house so thoroughly, it's time you handle the operating costs." David's jaw dropped. "Are you serious? We can't afford utility bills right now. Sarah is planning a huge Christmas event for her brand, and we need every dollar." "Then I suggest she scales back." I answered slowly, closing the door in his face. The dynamic in the house shifted violently. Sarah stopped speaking to me entirely, communicating only through passive-aggressive sticky notes left on the fridge demanding I not touch her groceries. The house slowly became a disaster zone. Without me quietly loading the dishwasher, washing the towels, and taking out the trash, the reality of maintaining a large home crushed them. Instead of stepping in to save them, I stepped further back. I started spending my days at the local library, joining a walking club, and visiting friends. I stopped being available to sign for Sarah's endless packages. I booked myself a lovely, secluded cabin up in the snowy mountains for the entire week of Christmas. I was already planning my exit. They just didn't know it yet. December arrived and the house transformed into a chaotic staging ground, for Sarah's highly anticipated Christmas Eve party. She ordered cases of expensive wine-towering floral arrangements and catered food, completely ignoring the mounting utility bills that were piling up on the kitchen counter under David's name. She strutted around the house, barking orders at David, treating the property like a rented event space. It was during this frenzy that I received the infamous text message from David. He wanted me gone. He wanted the illusion that they were wealthy homeowners to be absolute unbroken by the presence of his elderly mother. I replied with a simple, "Understood. I won't be in your way." I spent the afternoon packing my car with my warmest clothes, my favorite books, and a supply of good coffee. But before I drove away, I had one final piece of administrative housekeeping to attend to. Our neighborhood has a very strict homeowners association, HOA. Parking on the street requires a digital guest permit registered through the homeowners portal. Anyone parked on the street without authorization is immediately towed by a private company contracted by the HOA. Since I had been paying the HOA fees for 20 years, only my email and password could access the portal. I logged in on my tablet. Sarah had previously asked me to register 20 cars for her upcoming party. I navigated to the guest parking section, selected the entire list of pre-approved license plates for Christmas Eve, and hit the delete button. I then disabled the auto-approve feature. I didn't set a trap. I simply decided I was no longer taking responsibility for the parking habits of people who treated me like dirt. I grabbed my keys, walked past the mountain of catered food, and drove off toward the mountains feeling lighter than I had in months. The drive up to the cabin was breathtaking. The heavy city traffic faded into winding mountain roads, flanked by towering pine trees dusted with fresh snow. When I unlocked the door to my rented cabin, the smell of cedar and wood smoke greeted me. It was small, immaculate, and entirely mine for the week. There were no dirty dishes in the sink, no loud music vibrating through the floorboards, and absolutely no disrespect. I spent the early evening of Christmas Eve exactly how I wanted. I lit a fire in the stone hearth, poured myself a generous glass of red wine, and roasted a small chicken with root vegetables. I wrapped myself in a thick woolen blanket and watched the snow fall heavily outside the window. For the first time in nearly a year, my heart rate was steady. I wasn't waiting for the next argument or the next demand. Meanwhile, back in the city, I knew exactly what was happening. David and Sarah's party would be in full swing. The house would be packed with people eating food bought on credit, drinking wine they couldn't afford, and laughing in a home they didn't own. Sarah would be holding court in her velvet dress, soaking in the compliments about her beautiful house. I took another sip of my wine and smiled at the dancing flames. I didn't need to be there to ruin her night. Her own arrogance and lack of preparation were about to do that for her. I turned off my phone's notification sounds, keeping the ringer on just in case of a true medical emergency, and opened my book. I learned the exact details of the chaos later from Arthur, my reliable next-door neighbor who had a front-row seat to the spectacle. Around 10 o'clock p.m., the street in front of my house was lined with luxury cars, SUVs, and sports cars belonging to Sarah's friends. They were parked blocking fire hydrants, crowding driveways, and completely violating the community guidelines. Without the digital parking passes from the HOA portal, the neighborhood's automated security cameras flagged the vehicles. The HOA's contracted towing company, notorious for their ruthless efficiency, dispatched a fleet of trucks. Like quiet predators in the night, they rolled into the neighborhood and began hooking up the illegally parked cars. Arthur watched from his porch as the first guest walked outside to grab a coat from her car, only to find empty pavement. Panic spread through the party. Sarah rushed out into the freezing cold in her velvet dress and heels, screaming at the top of her lungs. She demanded the tow truck drivers unhook her friends' cars, aggressively claiming she owned the property and made the rules. The drivers, entirely unfazed by her tantrums, handed her their business cards and continued hoisting the vehicles. Sarah lost whatever control she had left. She began physically blocking a tow truck, banging her fists on the hood, and screaming obscenities that echoed down the quiet suburban block. The loud, chaotic disturbance broke every noise ordinance in the neighborhood. Arthur, tired of the screaming and the flashing orange lights, did what any annoyed neighbor would do. He called the local precinct to report a noise disturbance and a woman behaving violently in the street. The clock on the cabin mantel ticked closer to midnight. At exactly 11:55 p.m., the screen of my phone lit up, vibrating aggressively against the wooden coffee table. It was Sarah. I picked up the phone, swiped to answer, and brought it to my ear. I didn't say hello. "What the hell did you do?" Sarah's voice shrieked through the speaker, ragged and breathless. The background noise was a chaotic symphony of angry shouting engines revving and the unmistakable rhythmic wail of multiple police sirens approaching. "Why are there 2 police cars here?" She screamed, her voice trembling with pure rage and panic. "Everyone's cars are gone. The police are talking to the tow drivers, and my friends are demanding I pay hundreds of dollars to get their cars out of the impound. Did you call them? Did you do this to ruin my life?" I let her hyperventilate for a moment, listening to the beautiful sound of consequences catching up to her. "I didn't call anyone, Sarah." I replied, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "I simply removed my name from the HOA guest parking list. I no longer live there, so I am not responsible for your guests. If the police are there, it is likely because you couldn't control your temper in front of the neighbors. You have to fix this log-in and give them the passes. Now," she demanded, entirely missing the point. "I don't have to do anything," I said quietly. "Merry Christmas, Sarah." Without waiting for another shriek, I disconnected the call. I went to my settings, blocked her number, and then blocked David's number for good measure. I finished my wine, turned off the lamp, and went to sleep, completely undisturbed by the sirens wailing miles away. I stayed at the cabin for the rest of the week, enjoying long walks in the snow and the absolute silence of independence. I didn't check my voicemails, and I didn't worry about the mess waiting for me back in the city. When I finally returned home on January 2nd, the house was dead quiet. David and Sarah were sitting at the kitchen table, looking exhausted and defeated. The aftermath of the party had cost them thousands of dollars in towing fees they had to cover to appease furious friends. Furthermore, they were staring at a stack of utility bills they couldn't afford. David looked up at me, his eyes red. "Mom, please. We are completely broke. Sarah's friends won't speak to her, and the police gave her a massive citation for disturbing the peace. We need you to take the bills back." I set my keys on the counter. "No, David. In fact, I need you both to start packing." I reached into my purse and placed a standard printed 30-day notice to vacate on the table. "I am putting this house on the market next month. It's too big for me, and I refuse to share my space with people who view my kindness as a weakness." Sarah stared at the paper, her arrogant facade completely shattered, realizing her controlling games had left her homeless. They moved out 3 weeks later into a cramped, expensive apartment. I sold the house for a fantastic price, moved into a beautiful sunlit condo near the beach, and never looked back. I control my space, my money, and my peace. Looking back at everything that happened, the greatest lesson I learned wasn't about getting revenge. It was about recognizing my own value. For years, I quietly believed that being a good mother meant endlessly absorbing disrespect and sacrificing my own comfort just to keep the peace. But I realized that true self-respect doesn't require screaming matches, dramatic confrontations, or bitter arguments. Sometimes, the most powerful boundary you can set is simply removing your energy, your financial safety net, and your presence from a toxic situation. Walking away and quietly cutting off the privileges they took for granted wasn't a punishment designed to hurt them. It was a necessary act of survival for me. I finally understood that you don't owe anyone a place in your life or your home if they don't know how to treat you with basic human decency, even if they are family. Your peace of mind is not a currency to be spent on someone else's entitlement. Thank you so much for reading my story. If you learned anything from this, let it be that you never have to set yourself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm. Drop a like, subscribe for more stories of setting boundaries, and I'll see you in the next video.